The shocking move of his story came from Russia. Russian ships appeared for the first time on the waters. The bombing in this region stunned the whole world. NATO took immediate action after Russia's move, and the F-35s were mobilized to give the Russian army its worst nightmare. After that, the Russian army, which took the S-400s to Bakhmut, was in for a big surprise. The US F-16 sat at the table with Ukraine, and a striking development echoed around the world. In the last days of the Russian-Ukrainian war, many developments that will shake the whole world have emerged. The first of these developments was the embargo package that the US was working on. These embargoes, which could cut off all kinds of trade with Russia, drove Putin into a frenzy. The Russian ruble became the worst in its history with these embargoes. The US, on the other hand, continued its threats, saying that if Russia tested any more nuclear weapons, it would turn Moscow into a critter. Hearing this, Putin gave a very big answer to the US. Putin mobilized all his neighbors towards the US maritime border. When US intelligence heard about this move, they were shocked. The Pentagon immediately issued a red alert. After all possible solutions were devised, the US began to monitor the Russian Navy. The Russian Navy anchored at the US maritime border. Following this move, which was intended to humiliate the US and make a show of force against it, Russia made a very different move, with Russia organizing a historic exercise in this region where the US is strongest. The US mobilized its F-35s. They started dropping bombs near Russian ships. Putin was surprised as he did not expect such a move from the US. He tried to set the ships back, but it was too late. The US was convinced that this war had to end, and now it started to reveal the most critical moves. These developments have reopened the threat of World War III all over the world. Putin did not yet realize how much trouble this would cause when the United States announced that it would now send many different types of support to the Ukrainian military. The Russian military was shaken by a huge tension. The US decided to come to an agreement with Ukraine about the F-16s. Putin then immediately started to install a large number of air defense systems in Moscow. But this move made the US very angry, and Putin dug himself a hole. Then Putin suffered back-to-back defeats in Bakhmut. He decided to send the 400s, one of the most powerful fast systems in the world, here. When this decision was discovered by Ukrainian intelligence, the Russian army suffered the biggest defeat in its history. The Ukrainian army started a critical information-gathering adventure to find out where the Russians would bring these air defense systems so backward. Then the Baradars realized that there was only one direct route by which the S-400s could be brought to Bakhmut. The Ukrainian military immediately took action. But how the Baradars found out about this became the talk of the world. Knowing that the S-400s were active during transportation, Ukrainian soldiers sent 1 or 2 Baradars to this area. Then the S-400s, which have a long range, stopped by the Bayraktars before they reached critical points. The route was literally finalized, and the Ukrainian army moved to lay a large number of C4 and mines on the route. Knowing that the convoy could not be attacked from the air, Ukrainian soldiers placed a large number of explosives in the area where the convoy would pass. Ukrainian observation units were informed that the Russian army was approaching this area. The Ukrainian army then took their positions and waited for the Russian army. When the Russian soldiers arrived in this area, the Ukrainian army made the remote-controlled C4s explode directly. Van-Rossum vehicles and the S-400 enter the area. The Ukrainian army immediately took action and detonated the C4 under the armored vehicles. The Russian army was surprised by this. The S-400 is in the back, became an open target. At this point, one of the strategic bombs laid by the Ukrainian army detonated the connection point with the S-400 battery. This caused a huge panic in the Russian army. Although Russian soldiers wanted to fight back, they did not have the positioning they wanted because they were completely surrounded by the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian army crossfired the Russians, causing many Russian soldiers to surrender. The remaining Russian soldiers started to flee, and the Ukrainian army carried out another one of its historic operations. But what the Ukrainian army did to the S-400s made a big echo all over the world. The Ukrainian army brought the operational S-400 stay captured to an open area, knowing that they could not operate them because they did not have the necessary software. Ukrainian soldiers poured gasoline over the S-400s and burned them. One of the soldiers shared this action on a social media account. Thanks to this show of force, the Ukrainian army inflicted one of the biggest losses in its history on the Russians. The fact that the Russian army is spending very serious financial resources just to produce an S-400 has announced to the whole world that Russia will be in a very difficult situation on the other side. But the situation that emerged after this event put the Russian army and Putin in a rather desperate position. Since Putin had no more moves to make, he started to take his moves in Ukraine to a different point. The Russian army is no longer in a position to respond to Ukraine in many areas. Thanks to this, it is quite possible that Ukraine will be victorious in a short period of time. The comments made by war analysts about this latest situation have started to resonate all over the world. According to war analysts, it has once again become clear that Putin is experiencing great difficulties within the army if it continues in this way. Huge tensions are expected to occur while the Ukrainian army is now expected to take the necessary step against the Russians. Putin is trying to convince many soldiers in the army to fight against Ukraine. As in this latest operation, the Ukrainian army has attacked all Russian supply lines and the transit routes of Russian troops. This has dealt a huge blow to the equipment, ammunition, and vehicles available to the Russian army. With this lack of equipment, Russian soldiers were no longer even able to organize operations. The confessions of captured Russian soldiers began to show the whole world behind the scenes of the situation. After the successful operations of the Ukrainian army, many of the captured Russian soldiers began to say that they were uncomfortable with the current situation, stating that Ukraine's territory was unjustly invaded. The vast majority of Russian soldiers began to express that being captured by Ukraine was better than being a soldier in the Russian army. The most important indicator of this is that Putin has taken certain steps completely disregarding the lives of these soldiers. In addition, many other factors, such as the fact that the mobilization soldiers who had just entered the Russian army were faced with much greater tensions and lost their lives during training due to all the equipment, began to show the world the reasons for this unsuccessful path of the Russian army. But the Ukrainian army came up with a very different plan after talking to captured Russian soldiers. This plan, which envisaged that the majority of soldiers who did not want to fight in the Russian army would spontaneously become prisoners in Ukraine, planned to communicate with the Russian army through a telephone line. The success rate of this plan resonated around the world, although it was subjected to a lot of criticism. Ukraine has so far paved the way for the captivity of thousands of Russian soldiers. The Ukrainian army, which named this phone line "I Want to Live," started to change the way Russians look at certain situations, with the whole world on the side of the righteous Ukraine. It is not wise for the Russian army to fight against them. If the situation continues in this way, it will pave the way for Ukraine to take even bigger steps, and Russian troops will no longer be able to take the slightest step against Ukraine. If things continue in this way, Ukraine will win in a short time, which will pave the way for Putin's nightmare, resignation, and change of government. The flame of war has engulfed Russia. Almost daily, fires on Russian territory prove that the war has spread to Russia. While Russia is suffering great losses in the occupied territories, it is also dealing with fires within the country. Moreover, the cause of the majority of these fires is unknown. Last day, fires broke out into different parts of the city of Belgorod. In Russia, a fire which broke out after violent explosions caused a power outage in the city. The number of fires in Russia is increasing day by day. The fires that broke out in Russia simultaneously with Putin's invasion of Ukraine increased even more, with the partial mobilization decision taken in September last year. As the Ukrainian army's attacks and Putin's losses mount, the number of fires in Russian territory continues to increase. Although the exact cause of the fires is not known, many interpretations are voiced by war analysts. As the Daily News team, we have prepared a detailed report on the fires seen in Russia in recent weeks, including the fire that occurred in Belgorod the other day. We look forward to your support for our work so that we can continue with our impartial and accurate journalism approach. You can click the Super Thanks button below the video to support our channel and our teammates. Let's start if you're ready. In Belgorod, Russia, explosions occurred in two separate areas. According to the images shared, a huge fire broke out after the explosions that occurred in the evening. In the images, huge clouds of smoke covering the sky can be seen clearly in the fire that broke out after the explosion. A thermal power plant in the city also caught fire. The burning of the power plant caused a power outage across the city. While the people of Belgorod were questioning the cause of the explosions, fires, and power outages, Russian propagandists made statements. Some Russian media outlets explained the cause of the explosions as an attack by the Ukrainian drone, but this explanation could not be verified. There was a reason why the propagandist media organization supporting the Russian occupiers made false statements. The site of the explosion was a civilian settlement. Such media outlets constantly repeat the lie that Ukraine is attacking civilian areas. Their aim is to slander the Ukrainian military as committing crimes. But now everyone sees the facts clearly. So what really caused explosions and fires? A report published earlier this month answers this question. From the beginning of 2023 until today, hundreds of fires of unknown origin were allegedly started by sabotage groups, allegedly anti-occupation Russian sabotage groups which are trying to get Putin to abandon the occupation of Ukraine. And partisan groups fighting for the victory of Ukraine are the main suspects in the explosions and fires that have occurred in Russia. A Ukrainian agency providing military intelligence services revealed the increase in fires in Russia. In a report published in the first week of April, if fires in Russia continue at the same rate, there will be at least twice as many fires this year as last year. In the report, it was stated that a total of 414 fires broke out in Russia during 2022. In the first 3 months of 2023, there were 212 fires in Russia. These rates clearly show that fires in Russia are increasing. In the published report, the conclusions made about the reason for the increasing fires were stated as follows. Last time we put forward two hypotheses to explain the increase in the number of fires in the Russian Federation. The first was related to Ukrainian intelligence, the second to the Russian resistance movement. As always, the truth is somewhere in the middle. Another important aspect of the fires in Russia is that the fires are more often in areas belonging to the Russian military or in factories working for the military, military recruitment centers, military personnel, training centers, military vehicle repair stations, equipment and ammunition production factories, buildings belonging to security forces, military bases and ammunition depots are the main areas where fires occur. The increasing number of fires in these areas strengthens the claim that the fires were set by anti-occupation Russian volunteers or Ukrainian sabotage groups. While the Russian occupiers do not publish any news about the fires that occur at military points in Russia, they report on all fires that occur in civilian areas due to electrical leakage, short circuits, and problems with electrical components. Moreover, they associate these fires with the Ukrainian army with false statements having failed to make gains on the front line. Russia is trying to achieve success through slander campaigns organized through its media channels. The situation of Russian leader Vladimir Putin is truly pathetic. The fact that most of the fires are not reported means that Russia is hiding its losses. The Russian army has lost around 200,000 soldiers since the beginning of the war. It has also lost thousands of tanks, military vehicles, drones, and hundreds of fighter jets, helicopters, and cruise missiles. The Russian army, which has also lost important military systems such as anti-aircraft systems and missile systems, is approaching exhaustion just as the Russian media hides these losses. It also hides the fires in Russia because every negative development reveals the failure of Russian leader Putin and his army. While Russia is unable to cope with the ever-increasing losses and fires, the Ukrainian army is preparing for a new spring offensive. Ukrainian army's preparations have been on the agenda for the last month. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev made it clear on March 24 that the key forces were preparing for an offensive and everyone knows about it. In a statement to the Russian media, Medvedev stated that they are preparing for the attacks of the Ukrainian army. Our general staff is calculating this and preparing its own solutions. Ukrainian officials have also made statements about the attacks that are expected to take place in the next month or two. Alexei Danilov, chairman of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, recently told a media outlet it's only a matter of time. This time comes with a very high price for us. With the spring offensive, the Ukrainian army aims to expel all Russian invaders from the occupied territories of Ukraine. The next stage of this plan is undoubtedly to retake Crimea, which was occupied in 2014 from the Russian occupiers. Ukrainian leader Zelensky has repeatedly stated that the war will end with the liberation of Crimea from the Russian occupiers. Therefore, every step Ukraine takes means moving closer to Crimea. The Ukrainian army has made serious preparations for the spring offensive. Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal said that this offensive will help Ukraine regain control over the occupied territories. Together with our partners and especially with the United States, we are very concentrated on the preparation of our counter-offensive, Prime Minister Shmyhal said, once again demonstrating the importance that the administration of Ukraine army and partners attached to the offensive. War is the biggest problem of a country. It is a matter of life and death. It is the way of survival or destruction. It cannot be done without scrutiny. These words of the famous philosopher Sun Tzu are one of the sentences that best summarize the current course of the Ukrainian war. In 2022, when the war began, Russian President Vladimir Putin gave a 2-week time frame in his forecast for the war. But when we look at the past year, we can say that the Ukraine war has progressed far beyond Putin's predictions, especially recently. Nothing is going the way Putin wants in Bakhmut. Unfortunately, Russian President Putin underestimated the Ukrainian army when Crimea was annexed in 2014. He thought that they would remain silent as the whole world was silent, and he quickly sent his army inside the Ukrainian border without preparing it. Well, but at this point, Putin's hasty attitude has brought the Russian army to the brink of collapse. The Russian army, which was not properly armed and did not have sufficient plans, did not experience any tangible war gains, although it continued to exist in 4 important regions of Ukraine. This, of course, has done a lot of damage to the Russian economy and Putin's popularity in the country. After the war started, Russia, which was subjected to economic sanctions by the whole world, came to the brink of bankruptcy with the heavy economic burden of the war. Although Putin tries to take economic measures in his own way, we see that these measures do not provide any benefit. At this point, the Russian president has to offer a war win to one of his people, at least to regain his popularity at home. With the partial mobilization decision announced last autumn, the impact of the war on the Russian people has become very negative, and this situation will not improve without giving them a win. Putin and the Russian army have long focused on one place for this achievement. The city of Bakhmut of the Donetsk Oblast was the place where the heaviest clashes of the war took place. The armies of the 2 countries are fighting fiercely here. The Ukrainian army successfully dodges the Russian attacks here, causing the Russian army to suffer huge losses. The Russian army, on the other hand, cannot pass the steel curtain of the Ukrainian defense despite all its efforts. So why does Russia want Bakhmut? Russia has explained for the first time why for months it has flocked its troops to seize the industrial city of Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine's Donetsk region. If Bakhmut falls, the Russian armed forces will be able to advance into Ukraine. Bakhmut has witnessed some of the most intense fighting in Russia's Ukraine war that began last February. Clashes between Russian and Ukrainian forces are escalating fiercely as Moscow seeks its first major combat victory since the summer of 2022. Moreover, the Wagner Group, founded by Vladimir Putin's ally, Yevgeny Prigozhin, was heavily involved in Russia's Bakhmut offensive alongside conventional Russian troops. Russian officials state that Bakhmut is an important defense center of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Donbas region. The city acts as a regional hub with highways to strategic cities in the Donbas, such as Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. The containment of Bakhmut will allow further offensive actions for the Russian army deeper into the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine. But Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has made it clear that his troops will not withdraw from the city. Zelensky's senior commanders suggested to him not to retreat and instead strengthen the city's defenses. The command unanimously supported this position, and the Ukrainian chief of staff was ordered to find suitable forces to assist the troops in Bakhmut. Ukraine's Interior Ministry also outlined the importance of Bakhmut remaining under Ukrainian control. Bakhmut is a living wall that allows the Ukrainian troops not to hold back from the war. Successful defense of the city could put the Ukrainians in a position to launch a counterattack. The Russian army has lost a tremendous amount of people and equipment in this direction. They have been trying to seize Bakhmut for months and have been unsuccessful. Bakhmut has great symbolic value for Russia. There, the situation is the most complicated at the moment, but the Ukrainian defense stands strong and performs combat missions. Many analysts said that while Bakhmut himself may have little strategic value, Russia would use the city as a stepping stone to one of its stated war objectives. Capturing the entire Donbas region and the Russian capture of Bakhmut would determine the course of the war. Unless Bakhmut is taken, it is impossible for the Russian military to achieve Putin's war goals in Ukraine. There is no way to take Donbas without taking Bakhmut, and taking Donbas is one of the main tasks of the Russian military operation. So what is the situation in Bakhmut right now? At the last point, the Ukrainian forces hold an important route in and out of Bakhmut in the Donetsk region. The corresponding statement was made by Deputy Commander of the Svoboda Battalion National Guard Lieutenant Vladimir Nazarenko. The armed forces of Ukraine hold the Bakhmut-Kostyantynivka highway and conduct a fairly stable defense. The situation around Bakhmut and its suburbs is very infernal, as it is on the entire eastern front. The Bakhmut-Kostyantynivka highway is a very important route to transport supplies to the city, and the Ukrainian presence there has prevented any possible Russian supplies. There have been no tactical changes on the Ukrainian side, and the Ukrainian army is holding the defense. On the other hand, they look for weakness in the Russian army, try to distract the Ukrainian forces by fighting, withdraw their reserves, try to combine different methods and tactics, but fail in such efforts. Increasing claims about the possible withdrawal of Ukraine from the city also do not reflect the truth. There is no retreat. On the contrary, some new reserve Ukrainian troops are arriving as reinforcements to hold the defense. The entire battlefield is under a chaotic bombardment, but the Ukrainian army remains in contact with the city. There are uncut roads. This situation, of course, has put the Bakhmut war into a very difficult process for Russia. But for Russia, Bakhmut has become a matter of honor. So what happens if Russia captures Bakhmut? Bakhmut is not just a simple city. It is part of a heavily fortified defensive line, a city with long underground tunnels and walls. That's why the Russian army's capture of this castle seems quite difficult in the current state. The fall of Bakhmut will allow it to reach other settlements in the Donetsk region after Bakhmut. The Russian army could attack cities such as Kramatorsk and Sloviansk after Bakhmut. The road to other Ukrainian towns in the direction of Donetsk becomes clear for the Russians. And that's why the Ukrainian army has set up an unprecedented defense line in Bakhmut. Russian officials claim that Russia currently controls the entire eastern part of Bakhmut, but the Ukrainian chief of staff argues the opposite. Well, isn't there another place the Trillianussia seizes again and wants to take besides Bakhmut? It was alleged that Russia could risk launching a new attack on the city of Volodar in the Donetsk region in eastern Ukraine. Until recently, the Russian command saw a breakthrough in Volodar as a key way to achieve an operationally significant breakthrough on the Ukrainian battlefield. Volodar witnessed intense fighting in January and February as Russian troops tried to seize the town. The capture of Volodar strengthened the possibility that the war could turn in Moscow's favor. But the Ukrainian army inflicted the loss of dozens of armored vehicles and soldiers on the Russian army in an unsuccessful attempt by Russian forces to capture the eastern Ukrainian town. Russian planners will likely face the dilemma of attempting another Volodar offensive or supporting intense fighting further north near Bakhmut and Kreminna. Volodar could have been a new, very important acquisition for the Russian army at that time. Taking control of this settlement would have given Russian troops access to the Krasna Army's Kakhovskaya directions. But the Russian attack on Volodar was reportedly stopped by the end of the first week of February. As in the sentence we quoted you at the beginning, Russian President Putin apparently started the war without scrutinizing it. There is no other explanation for the fact that the Russian army suffered such heavy losses and could not make any gains despite being the attacking party. It is difficult to know how this war, which left its mark on the 21st century, will end at the moment, but it seems that in the end it is already clear who will lose everything. So what do you think about this subject? Please express your thoughts in the comments. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications in order to be informed about new videos. Thank you for watching us.